So I'm going to start off by just kind of explaining what our program is. So I'm going to kind of share my screen. Okay. All right. So I kind of made something that just kind of shows like how to engage today because it looks a little bit different. So this isn't like doing a live program where we're all able to just be in one room and talking, and it can get a little bit difficult in that way. So I thought I would kind of go through like how we're going to try and keep order because we really only have an hour and a half. So if you aren't speaking, just mute your microphone. If you've done Zoom meetings, you know that's what it's like, especially with your phone. It seems to do a lot of feedback. So if you're not actively talking, we'll just make sure that's muted. And then let us know in the comments if you do want to share your testimonial or talk. So I think we'll kind of keep it in an order in that way. So the comments are usually, you can pull them up. If you go down to the bottom of Zoom, it has like, where there's the comment box chat. So you can kind of put your name in there if you want to share, just to keep it a little bit more simple, and we'll go in order in that way. So we'll try to keep order. And then please be mindful of time and try to keep things to about like 3 to 5 minutes ideally. I understand that we're going to have a lot to talk about, so it's going to be hard to do like a whole testimonial in 5 minutes, but just try to be aware of if you're talking a little bit longer. Just because well, if we only have a group that's around this size, it won't be as big of a deal. But if we have it where it's getting to be like dozens of people, it'll be a little bit more challenging. And then only share what makes you feel comfortable. This is recorded, so make sure that you don't say anything you don't want other people to hear. And don't feel pressure to talk if you don't want to. There's no pressure. If you like what you hear, you can do the clap or share the thumbs up, which is a part of Zoom. So down at the bottom, it has reactions that you're able to do in that way. So do let people know you're listening to them and supportive. Oops, oops, oops. Another one. If we do get to where it's like going long, I'm going to send you a private message through the chat feature. So that means no one else will see it, but it will go right to you and it'll say you've got about a minute. I'm going to try and really kind of keep things like, if we get a little busy, I'll try to keep it down to like a safe amount. So I'll send you a private message so no one else will see it, but so you'll have some idea. All right, so then I think we can go ahead and get started. So I'm going to unmute everyone. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So who would like to talk first? Izzy, I know you had some things in mind of who you wanted to share, but then we can go with questions if we don't have anything.
Well, to start out with, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Tyson Cargill and Alicia Marks for making those videos. And if you guys have not watched those videos, please go down to the discussions on our event page and check out those videos. They're absolutely amazing. They're wonderful stories through addiction and through recovery. And both of them are local and do so much to help our community.
Well, I just want to preface this for those of you who, Izzy and I met last year at an event that I was working with Overdose Lifeline, which if you're not familiar with Overdose Lifeline, they're the largest nonprofit in the state of Indiana addressing the opioid epidemic and also responsible for distributing a lot of naloxone over the entire state of Indiana. What do we have, 92, 93 counties? We traveled all over the state last summer, and we hit Terre Haute, and that's where I met Izzy, and she had asked me to speak. So I just kind of wanted to preference or just kind of give you guys a context of how this all came about. And there's another nonprofit that I work with called PAL, which is Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, and as a result of that, one of the parents of addicted loved ones, I believe they set up a meeting. They started a meeting in Terre Haute, which for those of you who know anybody who are parents of a young adult or it's a spouse or what have you, who's struggling with this awful disease of substance use disorder or alcoholism, opioids, cocaine, meth, all of the above, parents. So I just want to say a lot of good things came out of that. And one of those is the fact that I'm sitting here looking at all your faces this morning. So thank you for asking me. With that said, I'm going to just want you to start out, and I'm reading this, so bear with me. I believe I'm a minister and a chaplain ordained. I have my master's of divinity, went to seminary, and And something that really started to bother me was the faith community not really getting on board with this issue more, this epidemic. And so I wanted to start out saying that as a minister, I believe the community of faith has not been utilized to help people struggling with addiction and their families as well. It's my hope that if there's one thing you leave here with today, it is the need to preach about this catastrophic epidemic and the spiritual impact it has on so many people. And I wanted to tell you, you don't have to be a preacher to preach. So as a sidebar, I want to share a deeply personal story with you for what has been the greatest challenge to my faith and my endurance. Izzy, I haven't read this for a long time, so if I get a little choked up, please bear with me, guys. For fear of being judged and the pain of societal rejection. My husband, Alex, many of you know the story of The Tale of Two Cities. It's a famous book that was written, and I wanted to share with you kind of an interpretation. Now, with the people that are dealing with this disease, that all of us have unique stories, and one of the things that we do share is a common thread. And so I liken my spiritual journey in this area over the past 7 years to a book of sorts. You probably heard, since this is a library, of the book A Tale of Two Cities. It's a classic. And my story is what I refer to as a tale of two diseases. On September 28th, 2015, my husband was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a cancer of the blood. Alex, my husband's name, was 49 years old, physically fit. He ate a healthy diet. He was a non-smoker. None of the criteria for someone susceptible to a life-threatening disease. He started chemotherapy 6 days later. After several months of chemo and an extensive radical treatment of radiation, 3 weeks, 2 times a day, we waited for the results of the treatment. Shortly after his diagnosis, we started to receive plants and cards and flowers and chocolates, and not one, but 2 handmade blankets. We were put on multiple prayer lists in Indiana, Wisconsin, Arizona, North Carolina, and Massachusetts. We had a priest come over to our house, and after we had dinner, he blessed our home and he anointed my husband. We sent out group emails and kept everyone informed on Alex's progress. The support that we received from the church and others while we were coping with Alex's cancer was nothing less than amazing. And for that, I feel truly blessed. But now I want to talk about the other disease. In September of 2015, the same year, my then 19-year-old son, Will, was rapidly declining from a life-threatening disease as well. Cancer, you say? No. Will's life-threatening disease was what the medical professionals now call substance use disorder, more commonly referred to as addiction. Despite all my efforts, all my prayers, multiple trips to rehab, Will was slipping away. You see, substance use disorder is both progressive and, if untreated, it's fatal. Unlike my husband's cancer, which in some ways brought the family together, Will's addiction fractured our family. It strained relationships. It cut a wide swath, as they would say. We tried sharing what we were going through with close friends. Some were non-judgmental in the family. Some were dealing with other heartbreaking experience, and this helped somewhat. We never, however, received a card or flowers. No one offered to put us on a prayer list. No phone calls to ask how Will was doing, even when he was in treatment. Few, if any, people asked us about the disease of addiction, and only 3 members of my family sent Will a card when he was in treatment. And interestingly, while most of the pastors and chaplains I have worked with knew about Will, none of them seemed comfortable asking me how my son was doing or wanted to know more about his disease. With my husband, Alex, questions came about what type of therapy is he going through, what is the prognosis, and so on. How long will this be? Not so with Will. I shared some of my thoughts with a close friend and a mentor who is also a pastor. She soon resigned after, or not resigned, retired after 40 years in the ministry. She had a huge congregation here in Indianapolis. And I asked her one day, I was very frustrated. I said, why aren't you talking to this about your congregation? There are so many people that are in pain besides my family. And her response was, too much guilt and shame associated with addiction. The congregation wants to pretend it doesn't affect them. Wow. I thought the stigma of this disease has even permeated the church. Now, I want to fast forward to the present. My pastor at my church today, Jerry Zare is his name, and we are a community of faith. He said, we need to talk about this. And he asked me to preach a sermon on addiction and recovery, and so I did. And I was overwhelmed with this response. My story was met not with judgment, but with love, understanding, and prayers. I truly felt the love of God, and I knew we were not alone. I preached that sermon in a church that has only about 80 people on any given Sunday. And I'm here to tell you that shortly thereafter, I had nearly half a dozen people share with me that they had deaths in their family due to substance use disorder and alcoholism. Others shared the hardships they were dealing with surrounding the disease of addiction in their own homes, and that they continue to share. Until I was willing to publicly share my family's story, they had kept their stories to themselves, silently suffering, believing that others would not understand, or worse yet, would judge them as being a bad parent, or their loved ones were bad Christians. They were wrong. Later, I asked my pastor, Jerry, if I could start a weekly support group for families, and his response was absolutely, this is your church. And so our pastor, on behalf of our whole church, welcomed the people to our first PAL meeting, which has been over 2.5 years ago. PAL, which is an acronym for Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. And we've done like everybody else, we've continued through the pandemic and had Zoom meetings with the PAL group. And this past Monday, we met for the first time, and we were outside, and I put the bed of my pickup truck down, and we sat down. It was like being at the drive-in movie theater, and we had fun, and we all did the proper social distancing. So I wanted to let you know that's where we all are today. I don't know about you guys, but Jerry, who was my pastor, he took the time from his busy schedule to welcome this diverse group of people. Some are very wounded, some were panicked, some are angry, some sad, but most of them collectively were suffering, and they were suffering silently. And this was just my little church, my little community of faith. He let them know that we supported them and that we cared for them and their loved ones. He then said a prayer, and then he left, being respectful of the group's privacy. Because just like Alcoholics Anonymous, the PAL meetings are just that. They're anonymous, and confidentiality is a key piece of that. The term recovery-minded church, it comes from a book written by 2 ministers. It's a calling for the church. And by church, I mean it in the broadest sense of the word, referring to all houses of worship and all communities of faith. To, as they say in the recovery community, to become part of the solution. Getting back to our tale of two diseases. While Alex was in remission after his cancer treatments, Will was anything but in remission. The progressive disease of addiction completely hijacked his life. Once the drugs entered his system, he lost the power of choice. You see, no one who suffers from addiction chooses to live that way. And then there's the collateral damage, the unbelievable toll it takes on marriages, relationships with siblings, grandparents, friends, and employers. It exhausts the financial, spiritual, and emotional resources of families. I had this brought home to me in a poignant moment when my eldest son, Sam, who must have felt invisible for years, watching me become more frantic and unavailable to him as I tried to deal with Will, his little brother's addiction. And he said to me one day, "Mom, do you want to hear about my life? Do you want to hear about my girlfriend? Do you want to hear about my new job or my new apartment?" And it became very clear to me that although I felt like the parent whose addicted child's picture was on the old milk cartons that used to read, "Have you seen this child?" my eldest son must have felt like putting my picture on the other side of that same milk carton with the caption which read, "Have you seen my mother?" I had become so focused on Will and his addiction that I was no longer present to my husband or the rest of my family. And by the grace of God, my son Will hit what we call a bottom, a moment of clarity. And with his only options literally being living on the streets or going to detox and getting into recovery, by the grace of God, he chose the latter. My son Will gave me a blessing to tell his story. He told me to go for it, Mom. He said, if it helps save one life, it's worth it. It's worth sharing. And so after the drugs and the detox, everything clearing from his system, he went to a no-frill rehab facility. And I'm not kidding, this place looked like the Bates Motel because that's what he needed after being to solve other rehabs. It's like, okay, we're going no more, some of these rehabs are like, we serve you 3 meals a day and clean your sheets. And you know what? That's not what he needed. So, and he had a bumpy start. And he was not real popular when he got there. He had a hard time. But ultimately, he found a higher power. And when I wrote this, ironically, I said last month on June 8th, now this was last year, he celebrated 2 years of sobriety. So today, a year later, it's June 13th today, Will's 3-year birthday was this past Monday, June 8th. So this is a big day. He now has 3 years of sobriety because this is a nasty chronic disease. No one except another person in recovery understands the challenges of getting sober and staying sober. And I say this speaking from a personal experience because I too was saved many years ago by a power greater than myself, a loving God. Not all stories end this way, however. As proud as I was of my beautiful son on June 8th, one of my dearest friends lost her beautiful son to a heroin overdose on June 10th. So she just celebrated, if you will, her son's life this past week on the 1-year anniversary of his death. It was less than 48 hours after Will's birthday. Today, I honor the lives of those who have died as a result of this horrible disease. My friend Jane's son, Guy, my friend Justin, the founder of Overdose Lifeline, her son, Aaron, my friend Jenny's son, Zach, my friend Rick's daughter, Samantha, my friend Sherry's grandson, Jesse, my friend Darlene's son, John, my friend Amy's son, Jake, my friend Marianne's son, Johnny, my friend Mike, who lost 2 of his nephews within 12 hours in totally unrelated incidents. And since I gave this talk last year, there are more names that I can add to that list. It doesn't end. I've stopped counting after 20. And that's just people I know. And if you take a moment to think about this, I'm only one person. If this has been my experience, think of the collective number of people in this room, on this site, who's ever listening, who have lost a loved one or know someone who has. Over 194 people die each day and every day from an opioid-related overdose and alcoholism. That number is likely low for a host of reasons, not the least of which is that our medical system is not very good with how it categorizes causes of death. It also does not include deaths from the complications of SUD. Bottom line, it's even worse than people can imagine. But those numbers are simply that, they're numbers. But behind those numbers are names, there are faces, there are souls. My story is unfortunately not all that unusual. Far too many families in your congregations or your communities of faith have similar stories. And the problem is, you may be aware of them. And this doesn't imply that we're not good pastors. What it does mean is that for any number of reasons, our culture stigmatizes and continues to stigmatize people with this disease. And that stigma, that shame, permeates the world we live in, and it even permeates our houses of worship. I'm here to tell you as a pastor and a chaplain that there are many people suffering, and they are ashamed. Ashamed to go to their priests, their pastors, their rabbis, imams, even their doctors. Many told me simply for the fear of being judged. And so we as a community of faith, and just as a community, have to reach out to our communities with compassion and to be a resource. It makes a real difference when faith communities unite and when pastors share from the pulpit. It did in the state of Ohio. The Attorney General's office in Ohio last year attributed a decline in overdose death to 2 factors, naloxone and the church, which began a program of talking openly about addiction, educating their congregations, and providing resources to individuals and their families. This, of course, is why we are here today. On Sunday afternoons, I work at a treatment center with people who are in their early stages of recovery and also in detox. And they are filled with the same shame, the same guilt and remorse that their families are. And they are desperate for God's love, for hope, and to live a life of meaning and purpose. On Monday evenings, I support a facilitated group called PAL, which I had told you about earlier, Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. These families are also desperate for God's love. They're desperate for hope, and they need and they long for a healing from shame and guilt. This is what my ministry has become, and apparently this is my calling. It is when I work with those most affected by this disease that I feel most connected and hopefully useful to God and even to random strangers. We need to let our congregations know that they are not alone, that God is there for them, for their loved ones, and that we as a community of faith will never, abandon them. My call to you is that we as a community and faith communities need to proactively reach out to those suffering with this disease and their families and let them know that they are loved by God and by their community, and that there is no shame in this disease, and that there is help available. I'm not asking you to be addictions counselors or interventionists or doctors, but you can direct people to treatment centers. You can pray with them and for them and their families. You can direct them to support groups. You can host a support group in your house of worship. No effort is too small. And this is what we mean by being a recovery-minded church. I'd like to quote author Chuck Robbins, a pastor who is 37 years sober, from his book, Loving the Addict in Your Pews. He says, and I quote, "I believe that there is a strong spiritual component to addiction. We are created in an image of the Almighty. We have a space inside of us that can only be filled through a personal relationship with God or a higher power of our understanding, as so many people in recovery say. When we turn away from our Creator and seek to fill that God-ordained place inside ourselves with drugs or any substance, we not only experience the natural, biological, psychological, and social consequences, but also a spiritual poverty that leaves our lives void of meaning and purpose. The church is an ideal setting for recovery ministry because there is already a community of love and caring individuals. I want to share something quite amazing that happened last week. The treatment center I work with, as their chaplain, called and asked me if I would be willing to do a Bible study with the adolescents, because this treatment center has children as young as 12, young teenagers. And these kids wanted to have a Bible study. And they were the ones that requested it. And I did their first Bible study with them last year. When I gave this speech last year, it had only been a week. And I was amazed at how many kids came. And their ages ranged from 15 to 17 years old. And a couple of them had lost a brother or sister or even a parent to overdose. So as we finish this up today, as I finish my message to you, I guess I would ask that we ask ourselves, what can we do as leaders, not only of the faith community, but the community in any capacity, to encourage our youth not to experiment with drugs, but rather, what can we do to help them experience God? Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for bringing that to us and sharing with us today. That is why I asked you to speak, because of that stigma is such a huge problem that we have in our communities, and that stigma affects people getting treatment, and it also affects the family as a whole. And I agree with your statement. I think it's important that we look at how the community responds to it. We try to get that conversation starting, and that's what the Wabash Valley Recovery Alliance has been trying to do, is to set these up and other educational things to kind of educate people about that stigma and to try to reduce it, because we need to have these uncomfortable conversations.
I want to add something. Obviously, since last year, the whole world has had the rug pulled out from, proverbial rug pulled out from under our legs, right? And so there's been just so much other stuff that, turmoil going on in our world, just one thing after another. But I will say that something that has also come as a result of the pandemic and the uncertainty is that I've experienced firsthand with my families, is that we're having more relapses. We got kids that were doing well who have relapsed and are now living in their cars, and it was predicted, and it's being confirmed that the numbers of overdoses, and it's not a surprise as a result of all of this, is going up. And it's unfortunately something that's, not in the spotlight and the headlines, not that it ever has been to the extent that, I think it needs to be, but that's just me. And obviously it's personal. People get more involved when it becomes personal, or they stay silent, and that's okay too. That's okay too. But if we're not ashamed, shame and guilt is like the worst thing that you can do to somebody, be it a parent or somebody who's suffering. That doesn't help anything. And so we do have other things that are kind of taking the headlines, and that is important. And yet the overdoses and the rates of addiction and relapse it's increasing, and we have the statistics to prove it. And another thing that I get to do is I have naloxone, so I'm able to dispense it to people in my groups. These parents need to have it at their homes.
We'd also like to tell your son congratulations on his 3 years. That's absolutely amazing. We are so happy to hear that.
Yeah, me too. I pray that we hear a lot more of those stories, and they're out there. I tell people there are a lot of young people in the recovery community that are on fire for recovery. I'm talking young people. They are out there.
There's a lot of those stories, and that's why it's important for us to try to share as many of those as possible. But not only the stories from them, but also the stories from the families like yours, because that really touches us all, and it helps us to understand the issues that a family has surrounding their loved one's addiction.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, when I was in your town, your community, I was blown away by the strength and of your recovery community. I mean, you guys rock. I mean, I went to some big towns, and they have not, collaborated and really put the effort and the energy that I saw in your community, which is not a huge city. I mean, it's a substantial, community, but not like some of these other towns that we went to. And you guys are on it. And I hope that in the wake of everything that's been going on, that, the recovery community, boom, they stepped up to the plate just like that. They put Zoom meetings together. People in these meetings were still going. I know we all want to get back into the rooms. It's really important, but they stepped up to the plate real fast. I was just amazed by your alliance. Sincerely, you guys are on it. I pray
Thank you so much.
Strong.
Thank you so much. And just like she said, I also want to make an announcement that, we do, the Wabash Valley Recovery Alliance and Center do have information for any families that is struggling with addiction as well. There are POW groups here, like she said, and there's also Al-Anon groups here as well. Sarah, you want to go back to the questions that you had?
Yeah, unless anyone would like to share, this is your opportunity. If you want to share anything, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we'll go to questions, and you guys can all just kind of take turns answering. Anyone interested? All right, then I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to toggle between computers. I realize this is ridiculous. All right. So what was the biggest hurdle toward your own recovery? I think especially in our community, there's several different people on the call. So if you feel comfortable answering, that is my question.
I guess I will start. My name is Izzy Hyde-Kelly, and I am a person in long-term recovery, which means that I have not had a mind-altering substance in my body since March the 7th, 2017. I know for me, there was a lot of hurdles. The stigmas attached to it was a huge hurdle for me. I had children, young children, and I was very scared of losing my children, getting treatment for my addiction. It finally came to a point where I was court-ordered to do so, and that stigma still stuck with me a lot. It was also very difficult, that shame attached, for me to openly talk to my children about it, which now, thankfully, thanks to my 3 years in recovery, I've learned to have those discussions with my children because they are susceptible to addiction. because of my history. And so it's very important that I do have those open communications with them, even though those are uncomfortable as well, to kind of make them aware of that and to educate them in those situations.
And I'd like to thank Izzy too. This program and many other programs like this would not exist if Izzy were not such a go-getter and so dedicated to the recovery community. She's really the connector. That's really why everyone is even here today, is because of the work that she does. And I'm just happy I get to work with her at all. And I appreciate your open nature. I think that you make people feel very comfortable talking about very uncomfortable situations. So I feel like I see lots of heads. Everyone feels that way. You're a gem.
I do know that this hurdle was also addressed in our videos that we did. I know Tyson and Alicia both addressed some of their hurdles, which some of them were employment. Some of them was seeking employment after they got out of it, with felony charges and other charges. And a lot of it was finding home placements as well in recovery homes and being able to have a treatment facility that was open to them. I know some people struggle also with having the money to be able to get into a treatment center. All of these things are things that we do try to address at the Wabash Valley Recovery Center. If anyone does need help, please contact the center for more information.
Thank you. Let's see. What do you wish the general public knew about recovery and addiction? I think that's related to those that work in these fields as well too. Like, what are things that you wish, especially when we're talking about stigma, what are ways that we can help reduce that?
You have to educate people, and people have to be willing to, you know, have a dialogue. Part of a what do you call it below when you do the thing, PowerPoint? I'm giving away my age. With the PowerPoints, something that we did, now this was for the church that we addressed when we were speaking about recovery-minded churches. You know, we named several of the myths that the church has held on to about addiction. Like, number one, it's not a sin. You know, number two, you can't perform an exorcism and, you know, exorcise disease out of, and I laugh, it's not funny because some people still believe in that, and it doesn't work that way. You know, if we could do exorcisms on cancer and diabetes, believe me, we'd all be doing that. But there are myths that the church has, and, you know, I had a list of several of them, but, you know, but just to even get an audience, just to get a willingness. So good for you, you know, that the library is on board with your, you know, your alliance that you have there. That, you guys, I mean, I said it before, that's amazing. You would be surprised. And I live in this big city in Indianapolis, and it's been more of a challenge. And I think that's one of the beauties of living in a small community too. I think there are a lot of advantages to being in a, not that you're a tiny community, but you're smaller than some of these big cities. And but we got to educate. We got to educate the church and say, look, people, you know what? This isn't a sin. I mean, if you look at sin as something that separates you from God, okay, yeah. But the word sin, that just, ooh, that makes people sometimes, you know, just retreat and coil, because that's a word that's been abused too. You know, to point your finger at somebody, they get defensive, or they, again, they do shame. So our churches, you know, need to get on board. You know, it doesn't mean we're bad people if we have a loved one with, you know, with problems. Doesn't mean that we're bad people if we're in recovery. But, you know, this is why the program of recovery, which just celebrated its birthday, was really officially the birth date of it was in 1935, has been anonymous for these very reasons. These guys were smart enough to know back in 1935, we got to keep this anonymous. We can be anonymous, but we can educate people. We don't have to point out people. People don't have to stand up and say, hey, you know, that's me, and tell their whole life story, you know, whatever people are comfortable with. But we have to educate the church, because there are a lot of people, old school churchgoers. If they get educated, they see things in a different way. It is a disease. People have to know that. And we have the data to back that up. So there has to be an interest. You guys tell me, you know, usually it takes something tragic for somebody to step up and speak out. And that's unfortunate too. Not always.
What I think the biggest message that I want to get to the general public is hope.
Yeah.
Hope. Those stories that we had shared on those videos, Andrea's story that she shared, there is hope. There is hope available. So many people, when I was in the midst of my addiction, I didn't believe that there was any other life for me out there. This was all I saw was the nightmare that I lived in. And I didn't see any way out of that. And I didn't see other people in my community show me that there were other ways out of that. So for me, it's really important that I try to do what I can to get that message out there and to share those stories, because there is so much hope. You can completely change your life in recovery. You can break change that your families have had for generations, and you can start a whole new world for your children and educating them through recovery. And the hope that you see when you see these people build their lives together, when you see families come back together after such loss and heartbreak, when you see people go out and get these jobs that they never once thought were possible and beyond their wildest dreams, that is the most beautiful thing in the world, is to be able to, for me to work in recovery and to see this stuff every day. That's what keeps me in it, is being able to be blessed by seeing all of those miracles happen every day through our recovery in our community.
I would.
Christina, would you like to say something on that?
Well, I thought I did, but I lost my screen. Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay,
great. Yes, I wanted to comment. Sorry, I had hit the wrong button, and you guys just. The other lady had mentioned this, that alcoholism is a disease. And if there's something that I would like the public to know and understand, and maybe they could have a little bit of compassion for individuals that they see struggling with this disease, is individuals, just like cancer or any other life-threatening disease out there, alcoholics and addicts do not wake up one day and say, you know what, I think I just want to go ahead and tear down my entire life and destroy my family and become an alcoholic. I do not believe that anybody that suffers from this disease ever wakes up and says that. Just as an individual that suffers from a grave mental illness, a life-threatening disease such as cancer, things like that, nobody ever wakes up and just says, you know what, I really want to suffer today. Nobody does that. So if we can have that just a little bit of compassion for an individual that is suffering from whatever they're suffering from. The last thing that an individual needs is to be ostracized, outcast, because they're different, or their struggles may be different than my struggles. Just kind of looking at it through a different pair of glasses, so to speak, and come alongside individuals instead of pushing them away and thinking, I don't want you too close because I might get that. Or I don't want to be associated with you because people might think that I am that. Let's get all that stuff away and, look at it at the point of view that, hey, you're my neighbor. You live in the same community as me. If I help you and you get a little bit better, then when I'm struggling, somebody's going to help me and I'm going to get better, and then we all come together. I hope that makes sense. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Christina.
I have a follow-up question, especially if there's people, that are watching this later. I think Izzy mentioned about finding recovery and how sometimes there are other obstacles, like being able to afford recovery, being able to afford to go into like a facility if that's what the path you choose to do. Would anyone like to kind of explain a little bit like how that's possible? Like what kind of help is there available if you feel like that's an obstacle that you're finding?
Christy, would you like to talk on this one?
Yes, I was going to. I wanted to touch on this question. A lot of people think that it's just so easy, when someone has addiction issues, when someone has substance use disorder, they say, oh, just go get help. There's all kinds of help out there. There's all kinds of resources. Go get help. And there are resources and there are help. But there are also so many barriers to get somebody into addiction treatment. You know, if somebody doesn't have insurance, if the treatment center doesn't take that particular insurance, oftentimes that person has to go to a detox before they can get into a treatment center or into a recovery home. There are no detox. Well, there is a detox in our community. Harsha has a detox, but sometimes it's difficult for people to get in. Sometimes there's a waiting list, and usually, if you know, most of us are familiar with working with people with addiction issues. If somebody's ready to go to detox, they need to go like today. And you know, oftentimes there's waiting lists, and you know, by the time that person, you know, they might say it's 2 or 3 weeks before that person can get in, and then who knows, you know, what's going to happen to that person in the meantime. And so there really is a lot of barriers. Then not to mention, like Izzy mentioned, you know, people who have children, like, you know, who's going to watch their kids if they go to treatment or if they go to detox? You know, is DCS going to come in and take my kids away from me if I choose to go to treatment? Am I going to, you know, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of stigma, like that has been mentioned. But that is what we try to do at the recovery center. That's our job. That's our main goal, is to connect people with the resources. You know, we're knowledgeable on, you know, the different places that take the different kind of insurances, and kind of try to help people, point people in the right direction. And I did want to mention, we do have a new address. If you guys don't know, our new address is 2022 Wabash. We're open from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. All of our services are completely free. We're funded by a grant. We also have a new crisis line that's open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And I'll put that number in the chat box so you guys can have it. It's also on our website. But it can be really, you know, it can be really difficult to try to find, you know, when somebody does successfully enter a detox and go to treatment and find recovery, it's like a miracle that all those things like came together for that person to be able to find the help that they need. So.
And can you also let us know what is the web address for the center in the
It's WabashValleyRecovery.org.
WabashValleyRecovery.org. Thank you, Christine.
Yep.
Thank you.
I don't know if it would be helpful. I have a large printout of, oh my God, an abundance of treatment centers throughout the state of Indiana that are very good. They all have different kind of, you know, financing, insurance, people that don't have any insurance. There are a lot of faith-based recovery centers that oftentimes there's barely a charge at all. And I will say they're very Christ-centered programs. You know, there's Celebrate Recovery, which is, it's birth of the 12-step program, but it's more Christ-centered. So some people might have a little bit of a problem with that, but some people don't, especially when there's not a cost. But there are so many out there, and I have a printout. I could get that to you, Izzy. You know, I could get that at the library. It's a really good resource, and we keep adding to it. Something that's really important, though, when you're looking into researching recovery centers, is to make sure that they're accredited, because you guys know there's a lot of people out there that are operating, and they're really shady, and they're taking money from people and exploiting a horrible situation just to make a profit. And we all know how that works. But so that's also something that's important. And I could provide that to you guys. I'd be happy to.
That would be great. Thank you.
It's a good resource. You know, we just need to keep getting resources. That's, you know, putting them out there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to go to our next one. What advice do you give someone that is in active addiction? This is something you guys do regularly, but as someone that doesn't do this, what kind of advice do you have?
John, we haven't heard from you yet. You want to give us some advice on this?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, if we deal with this quite often. First of all, I want to tell you that I'm also in long-term recovery, and if God has it his way, next Saturday I will have 12 years of sobriety. So if someone in active addiction, when they come to me, I try to tell them that, first of all, we do the typical pros and cons. What are they getting out of this? What are they wanting out of life? And 90% of the time, 90% out of the times, 95% out of the time, they say they want. And to me, there's like the first lady who spoke, we have spiritual warfare going on all the time inside of us. So I try to speak on the spirituality side of it. I also try to speak on what this is going to cost them if they don't. I cannot actively, and I don't think anyone can force someone to quit. But I remind them of the consequences if they don't. And a lot of the times here lately, as we all know, we've had a lot of people relapse or use because of this pandemic and not being able to be in meetings and doing just face-to-face. It's face-to-face is 100% better than doing the Zoom meetings. Not saying that the Zoom meetings are bad, but I just really try to encourage them on what it is that they're after, what is their goal, what is at the end that they're looking for, whether it be their kids. I tell them that they have to do this for themselves as well. They cannot, kids are a great motivator to stay sober, but they have to do this for themselves. And that's a big thing right there. People as well as myself, I tried to get clean every way known to man before I had to find a higher power, and I had to realize this had to be for me.
Thank you very much, John.
Can
Jamie,
I
what
just
about
add
you?
in there? I just want to say thank you to John because I'm a slow person in long-term recovery. God willing, on September 11th this year, I'll have 4 years, and John was very instrumental in helping me find recovery. So thank you, John.
You're very welcome, Christy. I'm just more than happy to see you where you're at today.
Yes, John does a lot of good work in our community. Thanks to John's MRT class, I am now debt-free from my student loans that I had accumulated and had for 20 years.
Great. Yeah, Tyson, hope is another thing that we have to work on. Tyson spoke in his testimony. I listened to it the other day and it really touched me because he said that he felt MRT for recovery.
Yeah. Deanna, did you want to add something?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I myself am a person in recovery. I am 3.5 years. And being a recovery coach and the knowing my own struggle and the things that I know now, I think it's important that everyone does reach out to get a recovery coach. I know the Alliance can get at the Recovery Center, and next up they have free services to get that recovery coach because every individual's recovery is different. I mean, I believe that there is that false belief that the same kind of recovery will work for everybody, and that just isn't the case. Everybody needs something different. Everybody's perspective is different. Their story is different. And the recovery is going to be different too. And having a recovery coach is someone that can be alongside them to help them get connected to the resources, because everybody's going to know the recovery that's going to work for them without even realizing it. A recovery coach is going to ask those right questions, and it's going to get them connected to all the resources that they need, so they're not going through it alone. Because I think that when you're in that darkness and in that active addiction, you feel so isolated and alone, and it's overwhelming. And having that connection to a coach can absolutely help and make all the difference. So it isn't so overwhelming, and they can get those barriers that do come in place out of the way. That's it.
Thank you so much, Deanna. I'm really glad you touched on that, because I think that a lot of people look at that negatively too. They don't understand that there are so many different pathways to recovery, And that even if you're not successful at one, you can try another one, because there are so many different pathways, and what works for me is not what works for everyone else. I have to work, 2 12-step programs, plus I have to continually go to counseling and go recovery, and then I did do the MRT financial class as well. All of our recovery does look different, and just because one thing worked for one or for a large amount doesn't mean that's going to work for everyone. So I think it's really important that we do touch on that, and we do try to understand and allow people to understand that when they go to the recovery center, we will try to listen to what you have to say and try to guide you in those areas so you can choose your own pathway that you feel will be successful for you.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna do my next one, which is very similar to what we talked about in the very beginning. But basically, how do you guide family members to help their loved ones that are struggling, and what advice do you have for family members? I know especially last year when we did this program in person, we had several family members that were kind of seeking assistance or getting more insight. And I know many of you do this as well. So what advice do you have or guidance?
Like I said before, we do, through the Recovery Center, we can give you resources as well for PAL and Al-Anon here. Being able to look at it for myself, from my experience, I have my own, I've been in long-term recovery, but I also have a son, a teenager, that's in long-term recovery as well. And in order for me, during his addiction, I needed to get help from a program as well that was able to, where I was able to connect with other people, and they were able to share their stories with me, and that hope that John was talking about more than anything, because I could hear other people's success stories. I could hear that I could have that hope that I had lost. And like Andrea talked about, when you're dealing with a loved one's substance abuse, or substance use disorder, it changes who you are. It changes how you react. It changes how the mother I was to even my other children, not only to that one. It changes everything about you and the way that you handle that situation. So I think being able to find some help in that for yourself is the biggest step.
I think it's really important to encourage the families to seek help. Something that I've learned from my own son is that I was becoming I hate this to overuse this word codependent, but that's a really important piece to look at how people that are dealing with this disease and the family, it affects everybody, and it affects everybody's health. And so the families and loved ones, they really need to seek out some help for themselves and learn how to do self-care. And, the PAL group is great for that. The PAL group has an educational curriculum, which is really cool because it's teaching people, look, this is what's going on. There are a lot of families that just can't understand this. They're beating their head up against the wall saying, what is wrong with you? I've done everything that I can, but it's not about that. And so, PAL is a great organization. So is Al-Anon. I encourage people to go to Al-Anon. The other thing that I think is really important for families is if they can get in to see a counselor, and preferably, most importantly, a counselor that knows something about the disease of addiction and alcoholism. And there are a lot of addictions counselors out there who've gone through school, they have their degrees, and they're in recovery themselves, which, get somebody, that knows about the disease.
Yeah, I think that's very important to seek any outside help. And it's also very important to understand that this disease does affect more than just that person suffering from it. It does affect the entire family. And really, when one person goes into treatment, the entire family needs treatment as well, so that that family can heal together and get through those barriers and get through those. Because I can tell you from my experience in recovery, it's not easy. You have to put a lot of hard work into recovery, and there are challenges. There are many challenges that my children have had to face during my recovery. And it's important that we all try to do that together as a family. And these groups are really there to help you do that, and to help you know that you don't take these things personal, because that's the first thing we do. That's the first thing I did as a parent. It's my fault. I've done all of this wrong because of my addiction. That's why my son has these problems. When really, that could be a part of it, but that's not all of it. And by addressing it like that, I'm not staying in the solution, I was staying in the problem. So it's really important to get that outside perspective and to have that hope and guidance from someone else.
Right. Tina, is there something, oops, you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think I first just want to thank everyone for being here and sharing so vulnerably. I think when we can show up with our stories and our personal experiences, that this is a huge way that we can reduce stigma in our communities and with each other. This particular topic is deeply personal to me because I identify as someone in long-term recovery. I got sober very young. And this, even just the way that we're terming, how do you tell family members to help their loved ones? My mom died of alcoholism at the age of 48, and I spent my entire life trying to help her. And so I have the unique experience of being in long-term recovery, having my own relationship with substances and a separation from substances, and all the work that took to be okay. But then I also have this experience of loving someone in active addiction who didn't make it. And so part of what I hope to bring to our recovery community in Terre Haute and all over is the normalization of the grief that comes around loving someone in addiction. I know from my own personal experience and from being in the recovery world that miracles happen. People get sober, they get their lives together, they dream big, they go for it. So I know that it's possible to turn your life around completely. I also know that it's possible that that won't happen. And I have met very few people who, I just feel like it's not normalized enough that part of loving someone in addiction is also grieving that. It's grieving the loss. It's grieving the way the relationships are impacted. It's grieving the possibility of all that could have been and that will never be because of the consequences of addiction. And for me, the hope in that is that even though I couldn't help my mom, my life has gone on. I have hope beyond her inability to recover. So despite my best efforts, she may not have made it, but my life has continued despite that loss, because I've been able to show up for the grief of it with other people who've experienced it. So I just wanted to kind of throw that grief piece out there and normalize it a little bit.
I think that's why this program is so important in itself, is that the whole idea of Faces and Voices is reducing the stigma and showing that there is the idea of hope, and there are people that are in recovery and are successful. And I think that it helps make it it is such a hidden behind closed doors community if you're not a part of it yourself. And I think the more that we can talk about it and reduce stigma, and there are so many family members that don't even know where to go and don't even know how to ask anyone, like don't even want to bring that up to their friends and family members. Does anyone else have anything on this point? Otherwise, my next one is very, very connected to this one. All right. This is something that Izzy and I have talked a lot about, especially with kind of what our goal was for Faces and Voices, is so parents that are in recovery, how do you support your children and encourage them? I love it. This is a terrible question, but basically, how is a parent in recovery, how do you help support your children when they're young and do you talk about it? What are your goals of having open dialogue and making sure that it doesn't just pass on to new generations? I think it's related to a lot of what Tyson was talking about as well.
I know for me, it's very important. I take my son with me. I have a 10-year-old son, and I take my son with me to my 12-step meetings. I take my son with me out into community when we talk about recovery. I take my son to recovery events, whether it is from a gala to, you know, going to just a recovery rock concert, to the fun run, to the glow run that we did last year. I think it's very important that my son is in there so that he can see that stuff. And do we have to have uncomfortable conversations with our kids? Absolutely. My older 3 children, it was very difficult for me to be open and honest with them due to that shame and the stigma attached to them, to be open and honest with them early in my recovery about my addiction and how long I had had those problems. But being able to talk to them openly about that, I also have to look at that's a way to break that cycle and to help save their lives. So it's important for me to be able to drop that stigma, drop that shame, and be able to openly talk to them so that they can receive help and so that they do know the risks involved. Jamie, what about you? Do you have anything good for this one?
I'm trying. Okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I'm not technologically savvy yet. So I think it's really important, exactly what you're talking about, Izzy, is getting, being able to understand that if children see what we do and they follow our roles more than most adults understand that. So they learn by our actions. So I think being out there and doing what you're doing with your son is awesome, I think, but I still feel like there's a lot of people that do still have that connection of shame, and if I don't talk about it, then it won't happen to them. And so I think the more we can break that stigma and get parents, especially that are in recovery, to realize that you know, they need to be able to talk about it to not only their children but other family members, and having a good support system is really important. And just working with the kids, you know, just showing them and being out there with them and teaching them that, you know, you don't need those substances to have a good time, and to be able to find a support system so that you can lean on somebody instead of a substance is really important. And the groups that we offer in our community, I think, are extremely important as well for family members and those in recovery.
I would also like to add with that, besides that, it's also important to have that awareness. Like for me, I am very aware that I did not grow up with healthy coping skills. Most of the coping skills that I had were from trauma. So I had to learn how to change those. While I was learning how to change those, and still continuously today, after 3 years, my son is still also in counseling at FSA counseling. He has his own therapist so that he can learn those healthy coping skills that I was not able to teach him because I did not have at the time.
Yes, and that's extremely important as well. Teaching those coping skills, realizing that it's okay to be in therapy, it's okay to have a support system. You're not weak, it makes you strong. So I do think that's really important as well.
And then also simply me being able to show up today, because my addiction started long before I picked up any drug or alcohol. My addiction started when I was a child and I ran from everything. So for me being able to show up today for all of my problems and being able to look and discuss with him on how to utilize resources, I think those are all very important pieces to show him that you don't have to run from that stuff and that you can face it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Deanna, did you want to touch on that as well?
Yes. I think that from my own personal experience of 10 years in active addiction, a lot of it was always trying to hide it from my kids. I didn't want them to notice or see that I was using. I thought, oh, well, I'm not this bad parent because, you know, I'm sheltering my kids. They're not seeing what I'm doing. When my daughter was 14 and DCS removed her, and I finally talked to her again, and she let me have it. She let me know how much she noticed. She didn't know what was going on, but she knew something was, and it affected her and it hurt her. And that was a huge wake-up call for me. My daughter is the one that actually put me in my place to let me know of all the things that I thought I was hiding. And kids, they know when something's wrong. And because of that, I was able to just be able to be opened up to her. I opened up all my recovery, what I'm going through with all of it. And she's been so supportive, her and my son both. They've watched me just like I watched my own mom to battle addiction. And it's almost a generational thing. And because I've gotten my kids involved and they know what's going on with me, and they come to events when they can with me, because now that they're involved and they know what's going on, it's broken that generational curse. You know, my kids are successful and doing amazing things, and they are aware and educated, so they don't make those same mistakes that I made. So I do think it's very important that the kids are involved, because the biggest thing that my daughter said that bothered her the most was the not knowing. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know what it was. And she got so much peace when it all came out and she knew what it was, because it made her feel like she knew how to be supportive of me, which is so strange, having that reversal of roles. And the same thing happened with my mom. My mom is 10 months clean and sober now. And all the years of my childhood that I watched her struggle and not knowing what was going on, we were able to have that peace now, and as a family, and it's all out in the open. There's no more secrets. And I think that is the main thing to get prevention for our kids, is getting it out there in the open to get them educated and aware, and know that, you know, this is a very, very real thing. And the not knowing is more dangerous, I believe, than not knowing.
Yeah, I just wanted to add it. I think people highly underestimate how intuitive our children are. And that sometimes they may even, they recognize it before we're even ready to admit it ourselves. The one thing I learned with my children, I didn't shove it down their throats, but I wasn't ashamed to let them know that I was in recovery. And, the tenets of the 12-step program are really pretty simple. And, a young person, tell the truth. If you make, when you do something wrong, immediately apologize. I mean, come on, this is a way we can all live, right? Give back, be honest with yourself. But the other thing is it occurred to me one day that the best thing that I could do for my children was to stay sober. And to live my program, not talk about it, live it, just like faith, live it. Don't shove it down people's throats.
I have a secondary question. So especially Izzy, I mean, you have a young child, so you kept him a part of this conversation, early on. How old do you think children need to be to have this kind of conversation? I know that, so I have toddlers. But I know that in their family history, we have issues with addiction, both in their biological family and then in their adoptive family. And so it's just something that's going to be around. And I know that's something I have prepared myself to think about discussing with them. But some of you that do this more professionally, when do you think is appropriate to talk to children about this?
Well, something you need to keep in mind is our kids are already being exposed to this. The minute they walk out the door, we no longer have a say-so on what they're going to be exposed to in their lives. And they're getting an education like we never did, especially with social media and all the things they're exposed to. So to underestimate that they already have a lot more knowledge, I think, than we even recognize. I have a friend right now who's writing a book for younger people, for the parents to recognize this is a drug culture, this is a drug age. And, at what point in time do you really want to kind of start addressing some of the issues with our kids? And I can keep you posted on that, because He's the guy that authored the book for the parents of addicted loved ones. But now, a lot of things though that we've found is people do not like to be told how to raise their children. So you have to be very careful how you have that conversation with parents, because they can take it very personally. And so, it's how you share the marriage. I will say, you're in a really good position as working in the public library in the community. Libraries are very well respected. And you could have people come in, even police officers. Now, I know that's a, controversial situation right now, but I still believe in, law enforcement. And I think kids look up to police officers. They're out there in the streets. You don't want to scare the kids, or there are people that are celebrities or kind of local celebrities that they don't have to divulge their anonymity, but they can speak to kids, especially if it's somebody younger, that kids respect and kids look up to. And sometimes, you guys know, they don't always look up to mom and dad, but there are other people out there that can have a huge influence on their lives. And, your library, I don't know what other venues you have there in Terre Haute, but I think you might be just surprised if you had a night that you just wanted to address this with the community in the library. I'd be happy to help you in any way possible, shape, or form, but I tell you what, I wish when I was a parent and my kid, well, I'm still a parent, but when my kids were younger, that somebody would have given me these tools and this knowledge, educate us so that we can, be aware, this is as old as time, but you know what? Know who their friends are. When they're up to shady stuff. I mean, come on, we do. Just know what they're doing. And it's, some of these are old, time-tested truths about raising parents, but this is a drug culture. And this is something that we need to educate ourselves and then be given good ideas on. And when this book gets published, I can get you a copy of it for your library also. Because I've talked to parents now, they're kind of starting, their kids are in middle school. It used to be, you don't worry about it till high school. Well, guess what? Middle school now is when things are starting to change. We're talking 11, 12, 13. That's a time not to pretend, like this is not going on. It's going on. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, I think that definitely makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that you and I would look into actually doing at the library. I think that'd be really interesting. I can tell you from my experience with my son, he was 7 when I went into recovery. And during my addiction, of course, he was witness to things. He saw drugs. He saw people coming in and out of the house buying drugs. He also saw us hiding those things from him. He also saw us lying to him about those things. So when I first started recovery, I had to be very set back and open and allow him, hey, would you like to go attend this meeting with me? Would you like to go to this recovery home for a dinner? Would you like to do this? Because being able to talk to him at that point, he had the same reactions I used to have. Oh, no, quickly hide it. We don't talk about this. We don't do that. And I had to understand that that was what I had taught him in those years of addiction. So it was really important for me not to force anything on him and for me to be open to having those communications, but letting it go on his time where he was comfortable with it.
I will say too, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So I work at Mental Health America of West Central Indiana, and I just started a few months ago, so I'm learning so much about mental health and prevention and addiction and everything. And one thing that's really big there is early childhood intervention. So like you guys mentioned, it's getting introduced to kids sooner and sooner. So we start teaching kids in elementary school about it, just so they're exposed, and it helps them understand what's going on in their own household too. Like you guys mentioned, I don't have any kids yet, so I don't have that like expertise, but I just from my own personal experience of growing up with parents with addiction, I didn't understand, why my mom wouldn't get out of bed or what was going on in her head. And if I was exposed to that a little sooner, I feel like I wouldn't have felt like it was me or my fault or something like that at such a young age. So just, you know, personally and from what I've learned this last year, I really feel like the sooner the better, because if you bring them into the circle, then they're more like susceptible and malleable and, you know, ready to learn instead of being scared of those things or like blaming themselves for problems or things like that, you know? So yeah, I think just, you know, my own 2 cents on that. The sooner the better. Elementary school may seem really young, but you know, as you guys know, with kids are really, really smart and they pick up things really fast. And to help them understand at a sooner age, you know, may help prevent things in the future. So.
Does anyone else have anything to add to this, or I guess any closing statements? We're already at 11:30. Crazy.
I know, Chris, you've been quiet this whole time. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say thank you. I've never dealt with recovery issues. I do have an uncle that spent 30 plus years in prison who got out a couple of years ago just to get right back in. He dealt with substance abuse and things like that. Did good for a while, and now he's back. It's heartbreaking, truly. And then getting to go to this last year was awesome, and seeing all the people that were there. You know, I'm hopeful for in the future that we get to do this again and have, you know, the 100 plus people we had last time at the library. I mean, it was great seeing that. And then finally, last year I spoke about hopefully getting Wabash Valley Recovery Alliance in the jail and to have some offices there. That is still in the works. That takes no extra funding. That takes no extra anything. I'm sure you guys are going to have maybe 4 to 5 offices with a couple desks in them. That way you can get to people as soon as they enter, and hopefully you can get them the help they need. I think that's a huge step in the right direction. So you have help, elected or not. I'm so happy to be a part of this. Look forward to this for the next 20 years. I mean, Terre Haute has really stepped up in the recovery area, and it's amazing. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much, and we really appreciate all your support and your help with everything.
Thank you.
You know, I wanted to mention one other thing also. You know, the importance of naloxone to train people about and teach people about what naloxone is, because that's the reversal drug for an overdose. The police carry it with them, the first responders carry it with them, and now there's been legislation passed through Aaron's Law that we can carry it on us. And the Surgeon General has said that we should all carry it on us. Just like in the old days, we all had to learn CPR for some of our work. It's important that people know what that is. It's just like a little nasal spray. And, you know, I had somebody say to me, why do I need this? I don't have anybody in a problem. I don't have anybody, you know, dealing with this. I said, you know what? You could be driving to the parking lot of CVS down the street or Meijer or McDonald's, and somebody could be overdosing in the parking lot. You can save a life, and it saves thousands of lives, and it can be distributed, and the state provides that. Overdose Lifeline just got $1 million, let me say that again, $1 million grant to have more naloxone, because they're anticipating, like I had mentioned, the numbers are going to go up after this pandemic. And they're already starting to see that. But people should know about what that is, even parents, just education, you know, educate. But that's important stuff to know about. You know, and when we went out, we're talking to the churches. One of the pastors came up with a great idea. She said, we ought to have naloxone in the offices of every single one of our pastors, because that way when a family will get to the point that they talk to somebody that they can confide in, and that's typically their pastor or their priest, other leaders, that they say, look, this will save your child's life. And a lot of kids, I hate to say this, but it's the truth, they overdose in the bathroom or the bedroom of their parents' house. I've seen it over and over. My pal family, we had a horrible summer last year. We lost 4 of our kids, their parents. And, you know, you got to have that stuff on hand if you know that this is going on with one of your loved ones. But you can also save a life when you're out there. So that's something that you could also do in the library. They do a lot of things locally, community-wide, to do naloxone trainings. But you just have to know, you know, where the interest is. You can send everybody home with some.
Yeah,
Yeah, the Wabash.
Sorry, Izzy, you can
I was gonna
talk
say, yeah,
first.
the Wabash Valley Recovery Center. Yes, we do naloxone training and stuff there. We do have it on hand, and we did last year. The library had where we were trained as well.
Yeah, we have it in our first aid kits at the library, just alongside everything else, like just like you have an AED. So
It's first aid.
yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
and we did use it last year since Faces and Voices last year. We did actually have to administer it at the library. So we know that it's just going to be more and more prevalent.
Yeah, we do. This is Christy. We do have naloxone kits at the Wabash Valley Recovery Center that we can give out to anyone who is in need of them. And then we just got an email last week because we're working on a grant program with the Indiana Addiction Issues Coalition, stating that Overdose Lifeline had gotten that funding and had more naloxone. So that's wonderful.
Well, I will make sure, Christy, that you saw Chris Schweitzer asked for more information about recovery centers and about
Naloxone.
medication. Yeah. So I will go ahead and close just because we're at our hour and a half. I'm really thankful we were able to still do this event, even if it was very different than last year and very different than anticipated. I still think it's an important conversation. And hopefully this has been recorded, so we'll share it online, and hopefully we'll have some views of people that would have attended this event or maybe wouldn't have if it were in the library. So hopefully if things go well, we can do another one, not waiting a whole other year. I'd really like to be able to do one sometime in the fall if possible. So I hope to have you guys all on board, and the more we can talk about this, the better. And so I'm very thankful the library gets to be a part of this in any way, and I'm so thankful for Izzy and all of you guys spending your time with us today. And anyone else have anything? Otherwise, I'll go ahead and close.
We're just really thankful that the library is always willing to help out and be a part of this as well.
It's very important. Thank you.